Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Warwick F1 show. This is the 42nd episode of the 2025 season, and we are back with a race preview for the Singapore Grand Prix. We have come off the back of a Baku Grand Prix, which has opened up a potential opportunity in the championship battle for a certain driver who drives a Red Bull. Now, we're not talking about Yuki Tsunoda, we're talking about Max Verstappen here. Obviously. So we're going to be talking about that. We're going to be talking about how and where we expect McLaren to be after some poor performances over the last couple of races, and some other threats and discussions about the weather and the heat of Singapore. I'm your host for this episode, Anwar. I'm the content creation officer here at the Warwick F1 Society. I'm joined by my co-host, Daniel, who always joins me on these episodes. So thank you for joining me. I guess let's start this discussion with where the championship battle sits at the moment, because the McLarens haven't had the best performances over the last couple of races and performed particularly poorly at our last outing at Baku, where Piastri retired after having what can only be described as a dismal performance over the course of the weekend, and Norris failed to capitalise on the opportunity of that by only finishing 7th. Daniel, where do we assess this championship battle as? Because we discussed earlier in the season the McLaren should win this at a canter, but that isn't really happening here, is it?
No, I mean, we're in a strange place, really, where this championship fight that was touted as a 2-horse race is kind of like another half a horse that's got its image in frame but isn't quite in the race yet, in the form of Max Verstappen, of course. Which is interesting because you just can't predict where he's going to be next. I mean, not just in racing series, of course, when he stepped in GT3 at the Nordschleife and won the other day, but also just in terms of where he's going to be in the pecking order. Red Bull, of course, brought those upgrades to Monza. They brought something for the front wing and the floor, body, fences, and the kind of edge area to increase performance, which seemed to be Monza-specific on the surface. But then it turned out that actually it did bring quite a lot of beneficial performance that could be transferred across to other circuits as well. And then in Baku, they turned up, they kind of reprofiled the rear corner of that Red Bull car. And once again, they were incredibly competitive. Now, does that mean that they've taken a step forward that can be applied to different types of circuits like Singapore? We'll have to wait and see. But in terms of McLaren, I think it was kind of a perfect storm for Verstappen to capitalise in Baku. I'm not sure that the pace is going to translate. Sorry to be a pessimist. I don't want to kind of, kill off this championship battle before it's really gotten underway, but at the same time, this should be McLaren's happy hunting ground at Singapore. If it's not, then we get excited and we can kind of start, hyping up even more and building, because Max Verstappen in a title fight with 2 other drivers, we haven't quite seen that before. It's something new and exciting, and I'd like to see how that would pan out. But as for Baku, I think it was probably just a blip. I mean, it's a concerning blip, especially for Oscar Piastri, when he made that. Honestly, I'm not sure I can remember a mistake much worse than Oscar Piastri did. I mean, the last weekend that comes to mind that was this shockingly bad was probably Lewis Hamilton in COTA last year, when he got knocked out in Q1 and then spun off on the first lap and was out of the race. It's kind of that level of shocking. Obviously, Lewis Hamilton wasn't championship leader at the time. So, where does he go from here? I don't think momentum really is a thing in Formula One, so I'm not sure if negative momentum is or not. I guess we're going to find out, but Oscar Piastri is probably just zoning in and going to block out all the noise and get back to where he should be at the top, honestly, because it was bizarre from him and McLaren in Baku. Norris not capitalising as he should have. The restart was absolutely abysmal. As Jolene Palmer said, wakey Lando, which I thought was very apt, because it really wasn't their moment to shine. So Baku, a highlight for Verstappen and Red Bull. If they can carry it on, I'd be ecstatic with that.
Yeah, I mean, let's be clear here. Me and Daniel here, we just want to see a really tight championship battle. We don't really have any strong allegiances either way here. But I think the result at Baku, particularly across for the McLarens and the Red Bull being a positive one, raised a lot of questions, right? Like you mentioned, Oscar Piastri having what can only be described as, I described it as dismal. You said it's probably one of the worst performances over the course of a weekend since Lewis Hamilton at Dakota. I think there's a lot of questions that have to be asked here in terms of we've never seen Oscar Piastri kind of be the favourite in title challenge, right? He's always played a little bit of this underdog role. We mentioned this on the last episode. And it's going to be interesting to see how he bounces back, or if he bounces back from the performance last week. Because a lot is made about Lando Norris and his mental fortitude, I guess. And I think this is going to act as a test for Oscar Piastri. You mentioned about the fact that he'll probably like to zone in and focus a little bit more. Do you think he's the type of character to be able to bounce back from such a poor performance?
Yeah, I mean, he bounced back from Australia just fine, didn't he? I know that wasn't exactly entirely his fault, but it was still a considerable error, if you like to say so. And, he went out and won the next race in China. So on the evidence of this year, Piastri can deal with setbacks and he can deal with them fine. It's that mentality you were mentioning of a champion is to just kind of put it behind you and get on with it. Actually, Anwar, I wanted to pick you up on something. I was listening to the Baku review, and just on the subject of mentality, you mentioned about Lando Norris. You said he's been very open with his kind of self-criticism, which you kind of saw as almost a weakness. I wonder, is that a weakness because it can kind of get in his own head and kind of exacerbate the issue, or because the competitors can kind of pick up on it and run with it and use it to their own advantage? I just wanted to ask you.
It's an interesting. It's an interesting one, right? Because I think a lot of people praise him also for being as open as he is, and I think there is an obvious importance of mental health and being open about pressures and stuff like that. So that's not me digging on that at all. It's more so, as a competitor at the top end of a sport, that's the type of thing that some other people also at the top of the sport might try and take advantage of, right? And that's not them being an awful person, that's just being a strong competitor. And when you're at the top, I think it opens up that possibility. I'm not saying that it is necessarily a weakness, but it could potentially be a weakness in some way. And I think for him, although it was probably an underperformance at Baku, where it was probably a little bit of a missed opportunity, he did take out some points from this championship advantage of Piastri. It's down to 25 points, which in the grand scheme of things isn't too much to overhaul, right? So I think it will wait and see in terms of whether this kind of attitude works for him. I think just as a slight concern, I think if you're at the apex of any type of sport or professional discipline, everyone's going to be looking for any type of advantage. And if the mental side of it and being able to break down an opponent is also plays a role too. So it's going to be interesting to see that. I think in terms of him and what he needs to do, again, he just needs to continue to chip away. I think 25 points, again, like I mentioned, not a lot, but it's something that he needs to. He can't let grow, right? As soon as that 25 balloons to, let's say, 40, we're looking at a completely different championship battle where he is very much fighting against the odds, whereas at this point in time, it's still pretty early to call, if you know what I mean. So that's kind of my assessment of that. Now, we talk about the McLarens, and we've talked about the McLaren drivers a bit. Let's talk about the McLaren car, because we mentioned about Red Bull probably benefiting through setup at Monza and at Baku, and this track being potentially coming back towards the favour of McLaren's. Why do you think that is? What is inherently good about this McLaren car and the conditions at Singapore that allow for McLaren to probably have the upper hand here?
Yeah, I think it's not just the case of McLaren having an upper hand, though. I think it's a case of their rivals falling back a little bit, largely because of the high temperature, which we might get into shortly. But and that kind of leads to more tyre degradation, of course, which is a relative weakness of the other teams compared to McLaren, who seem to be able to manage it all quite well. So on that front, Singapore should benefit them in that they can extend their tyre stints and kind of go longer and pick their optimal strategy, basically. They're not cornered into a particular suboptimal strategy because their tyres won't last. So that should help them. And then we have just the track characteristics in general, the slow speed corners. I don't think many other teams are particularly strong there, to be honest. I mean, I think Ferrari are probably decent in the slow speed corners, but they're the only ones really who have a specific penchant for them, if you like, compared to the other teams, bar McLaren. So just from that perspective, they should naturally be the favourites. And that is to say as well, there aren't many straights. The McLaren car is a bit draggier than, say, the Red Bull, for example, who, when they put on that low-level rear wing and the low downforce setup, they just kind of fly in a straight line, basically. So it should be a cakewalk, in theory, on paper. But, you know, we've seen before in Singapore when dominant teams turn up, they don't have it all their own way. Who would have predicted in 2023, for example, before practice one, that Carlos Sainz would go on to win that weekend, you know? So that's just the nature of Formula One, the unpredictability. Having said that, it's going to be a McLaren 1-2.
I think another point to mention, I'm glad that you mentioned the Carlos Sainz victory, because Red Bull have historically not been very good at this track, right? This is a track they've been notoriously struggling on. In spite of having the best car in 2023, they weren't able to have any kind of performance there, which was very peculiar, to say the least. So it's going to be interesting to see if Red Bull have overcome that type of weakness and if they are competitive. We've talked about two teams predominantly so far this episode. Do you see any of the teams that could potentially enter the fray at the front? Or do you think this is really going to be the two McLarens and maybe the Red Bull and Max Verstappen if in some worlds they become competitive this weekend?
Yeah, probably the latter, but I think that's not to say that there aren't interesting battles that are going to go on. Charles Leclerc said on Media Day that he thinks Ferrari is probably better than Mercedes at this weekend and most, thanks to the heat, which Mercedes don't technically prefer. But McLaren will still be clear and will be all year of Ferrari, he said there. So at the front, it's probably a two, maybe a three-car battle. But it is important that qualifying is executed well. I mean, if we have a mixed-up grid, then who knows what could happen. But 2/3 of all the races here, 10 out of the 15 have been won from pole position, which is a higher percentage win rate from pole than Monaco. So that just kind of exaggerates the importance of that pole position, and especially this season where qualifying is so crucial. So if someone can spring a surprise, a la Charles Leclerc even in Hungary this year, obviously you kind of could overtake a bit easier on Hungary than you could in Singapore, so that didn't last very long. But, you know, there are other opportunities outside of just race pace and inherent car pace to kind of capitalise.
I'm glad that you mentioned the focus on qualifying, because this is the type of track where you get a lot of incidents, and that could really influence the way the grid looks come Sunday. We saw that as a prime example at Baku, right? We've had a record 6 red flags over the course of the 3 qualifying sessions there, and that naturally meant that we had a mixed up grid, and this similar type of thing could happen on Sunday. A missed red flag can really influence the McLarens, for example, in terms of when they do their runs, and that could really have an impact on whether they can put in a clean lap. So there's a lot of jeopardy involved on a track like Singapore, where the straight, where it's not very wide track. There's lots of barriers for you to come a cropper to. So that Saturday is going to be more important than normal. And we have also noticed the fact that McLarens don't really like overtaking all that much either. We saw at Baku that Norris failed to really scythe through the field as much as you will like in the fastest car. So if there is a little bit of jeopardy, one of these two teams that we kind of just outruled could really play a bit of a surprise for sure. So although we are predicting we are talking about McLaren's having an advantage, that might not necessarily feed through once the results come through on the Sunday. Let's go into some of the battles in the midfield. We'd like to talk about the entirety of the grid, not just the top end of the grid. So let's talk about the Williams, because they had an amazing result with Carlos Sainz taking home his first podium in Williams colours over the course of the Baku Grand Prix. Do we think the Williams will be the fastest midfield car this weekend? Or do you think the likes of Aston Martin or maybe an RB can really take the fight to them?
Well, no. Williams are not going to get a second podium in a row, purely because Alex Albon said himself that this will not be as strong a track as Baku was for them. He said that Williams don't like the slow speed corners, but on the other hand, Singapore's quite a bumpy circuit, and the Williams ride is quite good. So how it kind of negotiates those bumps and eliminates them in the kind of suspension will be of benefit to them. Whether that actually earns them much lap time compared to the deficit in slow speed corners, we'll have to see. But I'm predicting Racing Bulls will probably have the upper hand on Williams this weekend. Hajar said it's a really healthy car that they've got. His words, it kind of works everywhere in all track characteristics, but they do tend to favour the high-speed corners the most. But having said that, I mean, Liam Lawson did fine in Baku without very many high-speed corners at all. So it proves that it is an all-rounder, more so than the Williams, I think. The Williams used to be competitive at pretty much all circuit types, but then they kind of got out-developed, didn't they, over the course of the season? And that meant that other teams were able to capitalise on their relative weaknesses. So Williams won't have the weekend that they did in Baku, as great as that was to see. I'm not sure Carlos Sainz is going to be back on that podium this time, but I mean, but the midfield's so tight, you just don't know, right? Because even the tiny details, like small aspects of the setup, for example, you know, you tend to favour a more rearward brake bias at a street circuit like Singapore to prevent front locking, or just little things like that. Because even just a little snatch of a front left or front right when you're going into a corner can cost you lap time on your qualifying lap, or ultimately see you in the wall, right? So these fine details, the small margins which have been present all year, are going to continue to be, which is going to make Saturday a spectacle for sure.
Indeed. I think that's been a nice benefit of over the course of the season, you know, watching experience. It's been that really colourful midfield battle that we've had. We've seen the Astons pop up, Kit Sauber popped up from Silverstone onwards. The Williams have always been there. The RBs in Hajar's hands was good, and now in both people's hands are good now as well. The only team that we're really missing out on here is Alpine, and it's a team that's really been struggling over the course of the season. Do you see their struggles continuing here? Because I certainly do.
Yeah, it's not like they have huge straight lines to lose bundles of lap time over, but they're just uncompetitive everywhere now, to be honest. Another one of those teams that's kind of fallen away. Gasly put in some great performances early in the season, didn't he? Obviously, he qualified in 4th in Bahrain and he finished 6th one time. Did you see that wild stat, by the way, that 19 drivers have got top 6 finishes this year, which illustrates the point you're saying about the colourful midfield battle, which is great to see. Yeah, Gasly got a 6th place at Silverstone, but since then he's scored 1 point and the rest he hasn't finished in the top 15, so they've really fallen away, which is a shame for them, because Franco Colapinto hasn't even got a point this year, so it would have been nice for him to get one on the table, but it doesn't look like that's happening. So all eyes to next year, if he is there next year.
Ultimately, you can't really predict that now because the Alpine team is impossible to predict. It's a very enigmatic team in that way, so we will never know. All we know at the moment is Pierre Gasly's probably in that team next year. That's as far as the predictions we can make about that team. I guess some other things just to talk about. We mentioned the heat being potentially an issue, and the fact that with heat comes deg. We've been given the F1's first ever heat hazard warning, which means that all the drivers have to wear their ice packs for the duration of the Sunday Grand Prix. We normally see hot weather around here, but not this hot. Do you think this leans into certain teams like McLaren's favour, and who might it kind of impact the most?
Yeah. Teams definitely have to run a kind of advanced cooling setup on the car to accommodate for the heat. And that inevitably can create more draggy cars, some more than others. If you can cool the car in an efficient way and get the engine temps down to reduce overheating, then go you, I guess. Some teams can do that better than others, like I've said. I remember, I think it was Ocon in 2023 in his Alpine, his engine blew up. He was incredibly distraught about it, considering he was running in like 13th place. I remember being quite surprised about it. But it just shows it can kind of be a lottery in Singapore at times, and especially this weekend when we're reaching, 30 degrees, I think, or something, which is going to be borderline unmanageable for these drivers. Do you remember Drive to Survive? I think it was last season, when they were documenting the Singapore race, and George Russell had that moment, didn't he? It was quite almost like a panic attack, but I think it was just severely overheating when he got out of the car, and I think he skipped the media interviews afterwards, and he was his breathing was laboured. And these drivers can lose up to 3 kilograms of sweat during the Singapore Grand Prix because they are, stuck in a 50-degree cockpit for 2 hours with no way to escape, really. And, it is hazardous. We saw it in Qatar in 2023 as well, of course, when they were pushing flat out because they had to change tyres like 3 times in a race. And, you had Ocon throwing up in his helmet, Stroll fainting after the race. So the heat is a real hazard. And I think these cooling vests that they have the option to use are going to be helpful. I mean, there are complaints from the drivers that they're a little bit uncomfortable. The tubes kind of reach across their ribs and they're sticking in a little bit. But at the same time, people complained about the halo when it was first introduced, and look at what that's done for the sport. So I wouldn't say it's necessary. It's just something that's a necessary evil. I think they have made changes to kind of adapt to the driver feedback. But yeah, in a race like this, it's you're going to want it, and if you're not running it, then they're going to add ballast to your car anyway to compensate for it. So you may as well just run it and benefit from a clearer head because you're not overheating in the cockpit during a Grand Prix distance.
This is definitely one that's going to be really tough on the rookies. This is ultimately the Grand Prix all these drivers train their nuts off for, right? It is the one that kind of fear the most. We've got 6 rookies on the grid. We don't normally have a lot of support races in Singapore in F2 and F3, and so we probably don't. This is going to be an interesting experience for them at a bare minimum. In terms of where we kind of expect some of who do we expect to be under pressure over the course of this weekend? We mentioned a few weeks ago Antonelli and Lawson. Antonelli, Lawson, and Tsunoda were probably drivers to look for in terms of potential futures. I think Lawson's probably put all of those doubts to bed over the course of the last few races. I think he's performed very well. I think there is still pressure on Yuki Tsunoda, though. He lies 17th in the driver standings with 20 points, and his future is probably on the line in Formula One. We are hearing rumours of Alex Dunn potentially joining the Red Bull Driver Academy, and that might play a role in some of the pressure on Yuki Tsunoda. How important, again, he came off a good result last weekend. Do you think he needs to replicate the type of result last weekend this weekend in order to strengthen his case?
That's really interesting, actually. I hadn't heard that rumour. I had heard the rumour that Arvid Lindblad was going to go and race for Racing Bulls in 2026, but I knew that Alex Dunn had been released from his McLaren contract, but I didn't know there were rumours linking him to Red Bull. That's really interesting. Yuki Tsunoda, I mean, the kind of narrative is it's a shootout between Tsunoda and Lawson. For that seat, you'd have to say Lawson's winning right now, but Tsunoda definitely put his hat in the ring because his hat was nowhere near the ring before Baku. But with that 6th place result, he's kind of made everyone sit up and pay attention, basically. And I think it's important to hammer home the message that he is not finished, and he has a lot more to give because I think he does. The team might not be Red Bull for him, but I think at the end of the day, he is just racing to prove that he deserves a seat, not even just in the Red Bull Academy, but in Formula One, right? Because that's what the drivers, they all want to just race in Formula One. Look at Valtteri Bottas. He doesn't care that Cadillac might not be competitive next year because he loves racing in Formula One and he loves driving those cars. And they do it for the love of the game, basically, which Yuki Tsunoda, he does love the game, but the pressure has been piling. There's a small release valve in the pressure now, but it's going to be back on soon if Singapore doesn't go his way, I think.
Like, from my perspective, I think if he finishes in the top 8, I think probably that will do good for him. I think if he continues just to score some menial points here and there, that won't be too bad for him, I guess, over the course of the rest of the year, because we know what his struggles have been. We've seen that this car is clearly a little bit of a difficult one to master in the hands of him, Lawson, and Perez last year. So it's going to be interesting to see if he is able to kind of rise to the challenge and rise to the pressure that is piling on to him. I think it's time to move to our prediction segments, which is something that we do every week, every race weekend, and we review them at the end of the weekend when we do our review episodes. Just for the people who might be new to the podcast, let me go through the scoring system for our predictions and what we do. What we do is we do a prediction for pole position or sprint race winner if there is a sprint race, and then we'll predict the top 5 finishers on Sunday Grand Prix. We will then do a prediction for a DNF, a prediction for, and then a random prediction as well. So this random prediction could be completely anything. Daniel's been very, very creative with his on the pod, so we kind of open up all types of avenues for that. In terms of how the points are scored, if you get something right, you get 3 points. If you get one of the race results, 1 off, we provide you with 1 point. But that's the scoring system that we use. So I'm going to let Daniel take it away with his predictions to start us off, and then we'll go through the others after. So start us off with our pole position and our top 5, please, Daniel.
For sure. Okay. The first 3 things I'm about to say might seem quite familiar, but then it gets a bit different. Okay, so pole position, it's going to be Lando Norris, back to that bit of 2024 magic, and then in the race he's going to convert the win. This race last year, of course, was that race when Lando Norris finally got a decent start and didn't lose the lead from pole position. And Alex Shakes came up with that line when he crossed the finish line. He said, Lando Norris can finally stop hearing about his starts and start enjoying his finishes, which I think was great. And he's going to enjoy his finish as well, this time in P1. But his teammate's going to follow him home in P2. I'm sure it won't make it easy for him. Oscar Piastri, second, bouncing back from Baku. In P3 will be Max Verstappen, a typical podium. He's not going to quite do enough. I'm sure many people have seen those tables online about how he can win the championship if he wins every single race from now on, and the McLarens are a combination of second and third. I don't think it's very realistic, but I'm happy to be proved wrong. In 4th position, however, I've gone for Liam Lawson, which would be the best result of his Formula One career. And I don't know, I just think he goes pretty well around here, given history. He's only had 1 race here, of course, but that was his first career points in 2023. First driver to get first points at Singapore, I believe. And like I said earlier, the car's just good. It can be good anywhere if they capitalise and don't throw out some strategy blunders like they did earlier in the year. Okay, 5th position will be Esteban Ocon. The Haas car is kind of slow in the straights, but great in slow-speed corners. And that's a great combination for this track. I know it's a bit left field to go for a Haas these days when they've kind of fallen away as they have, but I'm pretty confident in Esteban delivering what he's got underneath him, or Ollie, of course. Everyone's had breakout results, so it could be anyone, basically. But Anwar, over to you.
Your predictions really did escalate very quickly. It went from very standard, and then you threw in Lawson and Ocon, but I am not against either of those. I think that's a nice thing. I've gone the opposite of you, though. So instead of a Norris win and a Norris conversion, I have gone for an Oscar Piastri pole. I think he puts the demons to bed from Baku. I think that will just be simply a blip in the record rather than a real push of him crumbling under pressure. I think he'll convert that win, like I said, and I think Norris will follow him home. I think, again, like you said, I think these two McLarens, there's not a lot to separate them. I think he'll be there in the fight, but we won't be able to make an overtake. It's very difficult to make overtakes around Singapore. There's not a lot of good opportunities to do so, and really, their only opportunity will be through strategy, and I think I don't really see McLaren really being unfair in that aspect. So I've gone Piastri first, Norris second. Third place, I have gone with George Russell. I think that Red Bull's track record over the course of races here at Singapore have been pretty poor. That was not intentional rhyming. That's just how it is. I've gone George Russell. I think he's really consistent. We've talked about him at length at the season, how inevitable he is. So I've put him at third. I've put Charles Leclerc in fourth. I don't really know why or what's the justification. I just think Ferrari probably need a result, and I'm just being nice to them here. And I'm putting Verstappen in fifth. I think the Red Bull, like I mentioned, will struggle, but he ultimately will do whatever he can to try and pull that car as high up as possible. It is ultimately Verstappen. So no real curveballs in that set of predictions there. Let me go through our third set of predictions, which are our kind of our third co-host, Lucy, who has gone slightly different to us two, because she has really gone high on the two Mercedes in her set of predictions. She has said a pole position for George Russell. I don't really know what the reasoning is, but here we are. She does say Lando Norris does win this, though, with George Russell following home in second, and Kimi Antonelli making it his second podium this season in her eyes, and a double Merc podium, which would be interesting to see. She's put Oscar Piastri in fourth and Charles Leclerc in P5. So interesting predictions for the P1 to P5 and pole. Daniel, take us away with our DNF and random predictions then.
Yeah, some interesting predictions. I would be very intrigued if Piastri would win, though, because he was last year, I believe he finished, I think, 41 seconds behind Lando Norris, who won easily, which is crazy. It was along with Zandvoort, I think it was his worst race probably in terms of pace when Norris won. But then look how Zandvoort turned out. He was on track to win before Norris's DNF. Anyway, I'm getting off track. Back to my predictions. DNF will be Carlos Sainz for no reason other than picking him out of a hat. He's had his joy. Now he's going to have his misery, to quote himself in Australia last year. Life is a roller coaster. Podium to DNF. And my random prediction is that this race will be the longest of the season in terms of duration by at least 5 minutes. Now you might say that's not that random because it's Singapore and it's always really long. But, of course, they did change the track in 2023 to promote overtaking, apparently, which is never going to happen when it's in Singapore with these huge white cars. But never mind. The average duration for the Singapore Grand Prix since 2023 has been 103 minutes. Okay. And the longest race this season has been 102. So by that measure, we are going to have the longest race of the season, but in order to give it a bit more margin on being allowed in Anwar's very subjective and probably cruel deciding of what's good and what's not in the random prediction, I'm going to say that this year's Singapore Grand Prix will last at least 107 minutes. Maybe a couple safety cars would probably help, but that I wouldn't say no.
Interesting. I think the longest duration one is probably most fitting to this type of to this Grand Prix. I am very cruel, so I will make sure I will do everything in my power for you not to get the points that you deserve. But if it comes through, it comes through. My DNF and random prediction are a lot more boring. If you haven't joined us on the pod before, I love being rude to rookies, and this is a trend that is continuing because I put Franco Colapinto as my DNF. No reason except the fact that he is a rookie and I've got an agenda to continue. And my random prediction is we're going to get 2 safety cars. So I've gone for a lot of red flag ones recently and they've never come through. So I've now reverted to going for safety cars. I'm talking about full course safety cars here, just to be specific. None of this VSC nonsense. So
Okay, I would like.
Go.
I think both of our random predictions can definitely come in here. I think this could be mutualistic if we both pray for some chaos on Sunday. We get a great race, 2 safety cars, race length of close to 2 hours, and we're all in that. Remind me, how many points do we get for a random prediction?
3.
Is it 3? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. It's just I listened to the back of review. You said after I don't mean to call you out, Anwar, but you said I got 4 points. You said I got 4 points afterwards when I got the winner and the random prediction. So I was like, what? But it doesn't matter. It's
oh no, I can't do that.
We'll move on swiftly from your blunder that I've just highlighted
that was
to everyone.
Look, we weren't in a good mood because me and Lucy got a combined 1 point from our predictions. So
to be fair, in my random prediction, I could have just made it Lucy and Anwar get fewer than 2 points, and I would have got it. But
yeah, that was the easiest prediction of the lot. There, the most comfortable. Which says a lot about us, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Right, let me go through Lucy's and close out the show, shall we? So, her DNF was Fernando Alonso, the most unlucky driver on the grid, in his own words, and that doesn't seem like it's getting any better for him. And the random prediction is that a double Haas point, which is interesting because they haven't really been around the point scoring positions as of recent, so that would be pretty random indeed. But that brings us to the end of this episode of the Warwick F1 Show podcast. I want to thank my guest, my co-host Daniel, for joining me. I would like to promote the opportunities to get involved on this pod. We have a podcast guests group chat in our groups on the WhatsApp community, so feel free to join us there, and you'll be able to get notified on when we are doing open positions for our podcast. You'll be able to come on, share your opinions, so we're very open for you to do that. I also want to invite you guys to come to our race viewing on Sunday for the Singapore Grand Prix in the Fab building. So feel free to come along. There is a form, but you don't really need to fill it. Just simply roll up on Sunday into Fab 0.03 and enjoy the Grand Prix with a bunch of other Formula One fans. And we'll see you for the next episode where we'll be unpacking the events of this Grand Prix. I've been your host, Anwar, and we'll see you in the next episode. Goodbye.